Take your brand and life to the next level with Phillip Lanos. I am excited to bring on Phil. We were going back and forth on Instagram. Big shout out to Kristen for the introduction. And this guy, he brings the passion to his craft. And everyone who's been tuning in for over these 3 years now knows that's a key prerequisite now that I've grown the show. They've got to have the passion because I want to give the most I can back to you, the listeners. So, Phil, thank you so much for joining that entrepreneur show.
Hey, man, I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you on. Today, we're going to touch on so many areas from brand identity workshops, photography, podcast production, social media, content management, social ads, copywriting, and so much more. Personal brand management is a skill I think everyone tuning in today, including myself, could always improve on. So I'm excited to bring on one of the best in the biz. His efforts are to become a one-person creative agency for the small to mid-level entrepreneur or author that does not need a large agency or the bill that comes with it. This includes e-commerce businesses that don't want to focus on creating their ads when they're busy managing their business. We have a great episode in store. So everyone who's tuning in for the first time, I do want to thank you so much for stopping by That Entrepreneur Show. The loyal listeners, thank you so much. This is the show that is meant for high achievers and those looking for new levels of success. So be sure to find the episode that will resonate with you most. Phil's is going to resonate on quite a few levels today. And be sure to stick around for the spotlight story at the end of the show because it is another great one ahead. We're talking about personal branding from a Forbes article. And remember, you can scroll down in the show description to get a peek at that, but we're diving into this. It's time for all things. Phil, what led you into this entrepreneurial journey? What got you going in the beginning? Let's talk about your great work.
Sure. So I happened to step into this world completely by accident. I honestly didn't plan to be here, and I wanted to be an actor, a singer, an entertainer. No matter how hard I tried, how many bands or groups I started, because I was unwilling to learn guitar myself. Not that I didn't try, but because I was unwilling to put in the discipline necessary, it just didn't feel natural to me to step into that realm. It's not for lack of effort. I eventually realized maybe there's other places I can explore before making the double down commitment, regardless of the obstacles. So then I was working at a marketing agency at the time in New York called
That's
Ajax
right, yeah.
Union. And it was off the charts different from anything I'd ever done since I was mostly in the creative space.
Right.
I did work for an e-commerce, really small mom and pop shop, helping them ship their items that they got from China and sold them, at a profit, a healthy profit, I
Of
might add.
course, of course.
And we grew the company. I was the first and only employee, and eventually we got about 7 employees. I was managing them when we went from like $200 in profit to about $20,000 in profit every 2 weeks. Right?
Wow.
Yeah. It was a long time coming, and really the secret sauce was just consistency. Amazon was built that way at that time. You know, so it was really fun. I got a firsthand glimpse at what it was like to run a business. So then by the time I was in the marketing agency, I had that understanding. And then I started putting all these dots together in the agency because it was the kind of place that gave you a lot of hats to wear. And not a lot of people stuck around. By the time I came in, the agency itself was making a transition to go from having any client who would have them to only having clients that were willing to pay $10,000 a month. Right,
Wow.
which is a huge change because they had hundreds of clients and then really narrowed down on that. And then the president at the time, who was part of that company, was also leaving. There was a new president coming in. I came in at a moment of change and got to see a lot of things happening. Right. So as I learned a lot, I realized I've never really taken a chance on myself. So I thought I would do this music entertainer thing, but there's not a lot of money in it until there finally is. And I hate being broke. I don't say hate a lot, but I hate being broke. And then here was business, and I'm watching someone do that. Now, watching someone do it and actually doing it are two totally different things I learned till way later. But I ended up being up for promotion and turned it down because which is To this day, I'm not even sure it was the right decision. It was a lot of money, but I said, hey, look, if you're willing to invest that much in me, maybe there's something I'm not seeing. So
Absolutely.
I'm gonna go and strike out. And I did. And I've been striking out ever since. But at the same time, it's funny. You make mistakes and you get some successes you didn't intend to along the way. But that's sort of the origin story of where it started going.
I love that you're sharing that. Have the courage in yourself, believe in yourself, and just go after it. And you also touched on really focusing on your true passion. You had some, it sounds like a bunch of interests, but you didn't find it. You said you didn't really want to invest fully. Now look at you, everyone. I'm going to go take this moment. We'll plug them at the end. What's your website, Phil, so they can see how this passion, the website's unbelievable.
PhilipLanos.com. It's PhilipLanos.com.
And you'll see exactly what he's talking about how he really did go all in. But since that transition, you left and were on your own. What are some of your favorite parts of entrepreneurship?
My favorite parts, I get to meet a lot of people and learn a lot about what they do. And in fact, if you do make the decision to go into business and you speak to a client and you have no interest in how it is they make money, you're not doing it right. I'm just going to tell you off the bat right now. You have to understand the people whom you're working with, what their business model looks like, and how it relates to what you're doing. I'm talking key partners, key channels, and how they make money, where they're spending money. If you can't take the time to understand those things, it's going to be very difficult, and you're better off on Upwork. Believe me, I've made the mistakes.
I
Uh,
think you're right. Taking the time to really, as you know, even the podcast, I get to know my guests very thoroughly before I have the chance to bring them on. I make these talking points. I really want to make sure that I understand how I can best share your story, how I can best not only market you, but get my audience inspired. And you're already inspiring me so much already, but please continue.
that's about my only favorite part is meeting people. I got to be honest with you. It's probably the only thing that makes it worth it for me because I'm a fan of getting to know people, which is why I did so many interviews and why I stuck with it myself. And I imagine we share that in common. Outside of that, entrepreneurship, I just wrote about this yesterday. It's not for the faint of heart, in particular because
No.
we're talking about just at a basic level, right? You have to find a problem and don't manufacture a problem. There's plenty of people on LinkedIn who run businesses that are a manufactured problem to support or prop up a business model, right? And that's a hell of a show. You don't want to be that. You don't want to be a cast member in that show, right? But then there's the people who really do solve a problem. Let's say you find out that right now there is a lack of layman education for artificial intelligence, right? We might date this a little. I know people prefer to be evergreen, but it's just the
Yeah.
closest example I think people can get a hold of right now, right? So some people know how to use it, some people don't. We can take the example of even using Google Docs for, I don't know how many of you were listening or you yourself as well, then how many people do you know who might hit you up and say, in your family even, who don't know how to log back into their email, right? We take these skills for granted. It's a real problem. It's not sexy, but it's a real problem.
Um,
And if you create a business model around that problem that meets the spending capacity of that that demographic, right? Then maybe you have a real business. But there's so many businesses out there that just create and manufacture this problem, and then they try to like it's like a, it's a losing game really to build a business that way. But it's also equally hard to find a business that's solving a real problem. And then that's not even bringing in marketing budgets that you have to worry about, branding budgets, managing a team, insurance for the team, payroll if you're on business. The list goes on. So I can't imagine anyone who would love that. I think it's a very masochistic sport, but it's the kind of sport that you
like
can
that.
play until you're old. So if the only other thing I would say that I really love about entrepreneurship is that if you really do see all those things that are obstacles and things you have to manage and are not turned away by it, you can do it for a really long time.
I think you hit it on the head there. It is very hard in entrepreneurship. And I often say there's no blueprint, there's no textbook. You are going to get chewed up and spit out quite a bit, but you can go long term, like you said. And I find that it's not even work for me at some points when I do the long days and all these things. Now, when I was in my finance office and dressing up in a suit, commuting 2 hours each way to traffic. And those 8 hours felt like three times as long as, before I understood what burnout was, of course, and all those things, early entrepreneurship where I'm grinding around the clock. I didn't even realize how much I was working. I was just happy because I love it. And you touched on a lot of challenging parts of entrepreneurship for sure. I appreciate you doing that because entrepreneurship, I think, has a very misunderstood look where you have the one in a millions, the Bezos, the Elon Musk. It's not really like that for the average entrepreneur. You're really hustling, grinding, trying to piece things together. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and usually, and it sucks, but it usually
Yeah,
that's something you can source back to it being founded on a problem that doesn't really need solving or that can't scale up, right? Because you might have a real problem, but there may not be enough of a market in there to actually solve that. Well, I think the easiest way I've ever heard it summed up is there may be a gap in the market, but is there a market in that gap? Yeah.
I love that. And that is certainly an ongoing problem here in the entrepreneurial world. I'm so lucky to continue to connect with great entrepreneurs like Phil to get his insight on these topics. But Phil, as entrepreneurs, I learned in the community here, entrepreneurs opposed to other businesses are much more likely to help each other out. Oh, I can connect you to this person. Oh, this is something that helped me. What is one app, book, workshop, any tool that you've used throughout your career that you've helped find success with that we can lay forward to our community listening on today? But before we get to that, I am excited to share that this summer's episodes will be brought to you in part by speaker coach Cesar Cervantes, specializing in helping you get your transformative message to the TEDx stage. Guaranteed. To schedule your free brainstorming session, visit the link in the show description or CesarCervantes.tv.
If you wanted a Swiss Army knife for business, I think understanding the absolute basics, you might be better off reading the one-page marketing plan by one-page marketing plan, I do believe it is, by Alan Dibb.
No
He's not
way you're bringing that book up because I read that book and reached out to him on LinkedIn, telling him how much I loved his book. And he came on the show for episode 100 a few years
Oh
ago.
wow,
That
that's
is
amazing.
crazy, man.
Yeah, I think it's a good primer. Like if you read nothing else, at
Yeah.
least read that, you know?
Wow, I can't believe that's amazing. Man, you see the smile on my face. I've never had anyone recommend that book. That book played major dividends for me and just giving me the ability to think outside the box. Shout out to Alan Dibb for that book. But before we
Shout
hop,
out.
yeah, man, he's out in Australia.
Never met him, but I love what he's done.
I never met him face to face, just cold networking, the usual here, that entrepreneur show. And I just show him some love. I'm like, I didn't expect him to really answer. I was like, hey man, like your book, I'm like a student, I go through highlighters, I take notes so I can actually implement some of the information. And he was thrilled that I had the chance to reach out to him. But before we hop into this week's spotlight story, and then we find out which entrepreneur Phil would sit down with throughout history, either dead or alive, I'd love to ask you, Phil, what is one of your greatest piece of advice given to you?
Greatest piece of advice ever given to me. Oh man. It's a lot of like ones, right? Like V1.
As you know,
Uh
the show, I just try to help our audience as much as possible. And I think with your expertise, your experience, your advice will go a long way.
sure. Okay, so I'm trying to make sure this is the book I got it from, right? But there was a book by the name of Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee Adams, and that's Marilee. Marilee, right? Marilee Adams. And the book undergoes this narrative of someone who was the answer person at a company that eventually was promoted to leadership. And the leadership role was suddenly a big challenge because that person was going from being the one that always provided the answers and coming head to head with a team that they're leading now that the team is supposed to be the one providing the answers, but they're more comfortable giving answers instead. So then they get in the way of the team's ability to grow and develop, which is like
Love
the
that.
worst thing a leader could do. Right. And so then he meets like a wise wizard coach, tells him you need to see the questions you're asking or the operating software. And if it's not working, you need to update or change out the software that you're operating under. And the way to do that is by identifying what questions you're asking yourself. And the book doesn't say this explicitly, but this is how I summed it up. If there's nothing worse than than having the right answer to the wrong question, right?
Okay.
Now you may go your whole life. Like, for example, and this is where the book goes into it. If you ask yourself questions like, oh, why is this happening to me? It's all victimization. Like, that's the only path it can lead to. It'll just corroborate your story. Ah, well, people suck or whatever, right? It's a useless question. It will do nothing for you, right? If you instead ask, well, what could I do to change this? You see how immediately you might you might find that you can get the answer. But even if you don't, the fact that you're asking that question is a lot better and more productive than saying, well, why is this happening? Right. And so there's nothing worse than the right answer to the wrong question. And even better is having the right question, even if there's no answer.
It's
You know?
certainly something I admittedly can say in the past at certain times when I get down on myself and beat myself up, and then you have to find a way out of that mindset, start thinking outside the box. And for example, we were just talking about before the show where schools, unfortunately, still their budget problems are real from COVID. So now I've been linking up with local businesses, other partners to bring these books into the classrooms just instead of getting down, finding other ways to do it. Phil, lights out advice once again. Thank you for sharing that. Now I'm really excited to get your take on this week's spotlight story because of all your success in your industry here. Everyone, be sure to follow along in the show descriptions. It is from Forbes. Entrepreneurs, your personal brand is everything. The article starts like this. I talk a lot about the importance of branding for a business. Creating a brand that accurately portrays your company, what you offer, and what you want to provide to the business world and your customers is important. But entrepreneurs, that is not everything. When you're creating a business, it can feel like the image you're creating for the brand represents you as well. But while you might reflect in the company brand, it isn't the same as a personal brand. A personal brand is your image and your only image. You might share some characteristics with your company brand, but they should be two independent things. So why is this personal brand so important? Your personal brand boosts your credibility. Your personal brand improves your work opportunities. Your personal brand distinguishes you from the competition. Create a personal brand image. Let's talk about two of these before I bring on Phil. Your personal brand improves your work opportunities. Think about some of today's biggest brands: Apple, Facebook, Amazon. When these brands pop in your head, the entrepreneurs that founded them probably will as well. That's not a coincidence. These leaders have strong personal brands. They were confident in who they were as business owners and created brands around those images. As their business grew, so did their status. By developing a personal brand, your image can grow alongside the company's. As more people start to hear about what you offer and the products or services you're providing, you can meet them with a thought of leadership, ideas, and expertise that is just as impressive. When you start to become an in-demand industry thought leader, you can work with bigger clients and start charging more money. And the one more I'm going to touch on quickly before we bring him back on is your personal brand boosts your credibility. When you're an entrepreneur, a lot of your business growth depends on you getting out there and marketing it. This means about going to conventions, conferences, talking with other business owners or customers, and just spreading the word. However, this also means that you're not selling the business, you're also selling you. And if you don't have a personal brand to sell, you can't expect prospects to be interested in what you're offering. Think about a personal brand like a gateway to your business. When you connect with a potential customer or a member in your industry, you can connect on a more personal level rather than jumping straight into marketing your company's brand. And I think a takeaway I can resonate with this is you can know somebody with a great product, a killer product or service, but you can't stand speaking with them for more than 2 or 3 minutes. So are you going to actually refer somebody to that company? Phil, I touched on a few big points here. With your expertise, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. A first quote that came to mind just on that last point you made was I think I read All Marketers Are Liars by Seth Godin. And he said something about good marketing will only help a bad product fail faster. Right. And so I think that goes hand in hand with what you're talking about. And then, of course, there's the personality issue, which is where personal branding comes in. And I just did a whole webinar. I think it was about an hour and a half long, which is long for a webinar, and on personal branding and what I believe is an essential counterpart, which is thought leadership. And most people confuse those two for the same thing. They're
Let's
not.
talk a little more about that. And before we do that, though, where can we find this webinar you're talking about?
It's on YouTube. As a matter of fact, I'll share that with you so you can link it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Let's talk a little more about that. The thoughts.
Yeah. So thought leadership and personal branding, they are not the same thing, and yet they go hand in hand. Absolutely need to. One hand washes the other, right? And I think the easiest way to exemplify it is by saying thought leadership is the idea of being part or taking part in relevant conversations to your industry
Okay.
now in your career, where you're at right now with what you're doing with your business or your career. You taking part in those relevant conversations is everything in thought leadership, because all that means is you're going to join a current trending topic, whatever people are talking about, and you're going to pull on a thread that nobody seems to be discussing.
Mm-hmm.
That, in essence, is leading the conversation somewhere else, and all a conversation is a series of thoughts being reflected to each other. So that's the first aspect. Now, how you prop that up to continue ensuring that you're invited to more of those conversations is through personal branding, which are products and services that you create. Whether that's a podcast, just because it's free doesn't mean it's not a product or a service, right?
Absolutely.
Whether it's YouTube videos, social media videos, a course that you develop, a book that you write,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the case may be, all of that is personal branding that props up, creating opportunity for you to be invited to relevant discussions. And it needs to be a cycle that continues indefinitely. You can look at huge examples like Elon Musk or Ariana Huffington, which may seem out of touch and out of reach for many people. But then you can look at other people like Marie Forleo, who was a badass entrepreneur who was told that she can't be all things. You can't be a hip hop dancer, a business coach, and run a business where you create media and copywriting education. But yet she did it. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell her story for her, but you can look it up, right? Then there's Seth Godin, who now has established himself in an incredible way, but he's still something totally capable and within reach for many people. All he did was say, whatever traditional marketing is saying, right? He's a part of that conversation. Whatever traditional marketing is saying, I think we can go against the grain and do better. And everywhere you look, he would prolifically write a blog. Who does that? But he does that, and people still read what he writes because it's just that good. But it's because he continued to be a part of relevant conversations. The same thing with Marie Forleo. She found a tribe. She knew that many women in business were being told things of what they can't, what they should, what they shouldn't. And she stepped into those conversations and pulled on a thread and showed how it's actually possible. And now she leads retreats where women take hip hop dancing as a community building exercise while they discuss the development of business models and business plans.
Being unique, standing out. I just again put this in the show notes for when it goes out. Consistently being in relevant conversations. Thank you so much for delving into that. Everyone, be sure to head to his YouTube channel. That link will be in the show bio. Check out that link. And before we plug his website one more time, I always, and even as the talking points have evolved over the 3 years, this is one constant question because I love to get to know my guests better. Which entrepreneur throughout history who you have not met yet would you choose to sit down with and pick their brain, dead or alive?
Oh man, I ask this question all the time to people when I was doing shows, and to this day, I still think I have not met Tony Robbins. I know it sounds corny for some people.
Right.
There's some people in the business world who are like Tony Robbins,
Oh.
but it's just reading Unlimited Power when I was young really did a lot for me, and I'd love to know what he was going through, what he was thinking when he wrote that book, where he was in his life, what that was looking like. So for me, that's just the honest answer.
All right, delve deeper. Where would that meeting with Tony go down if you get to pick that too?
Oh man, I would say either a walk through Fort Greene in Brooklyn. Just love the neighborhood. You know what I mean? Or a walk through the city anywhere, but it has to be a walking meeting. Those are probably my favorite things to do is walk and talk with someone.
I love it. Well, Phil, thank you so much for taking the time to catch up with me, join the podcast series. I look forward to continuing to stay in touch with you and seeing all your great work. Where can we find you online one more time?
Sure. So I'm all things at Phillip Lanos. So if you look me up anywhere, it's at Phillip Lanos or PhilipLanos.com. You'll find me.
At Phillip Lanos, PhilipLanos.com. Everyone be sure to head to the show description. You'll have his website there. You'll have that YouTube video I was talking about. And the show is at That Entrepreneur Show on social media, except on YouTube. It is at Vincent A. Lancey. Be sure to head to YouTube so you can see a video preview of this show. But we are now signing off. Phil, thanks again so much for coming by the show. You gave a lights out show. I appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.